Welcome back, everyone. We have 2 panels left for the day, and I'm particularly excited about this one. We have really good guests with us. We're going to be talking about the future, the present, and the future of advanced analytics. One of those terms that's been around with us for a while now, not spoken about quite as much in the shadow of generative AI, but it's all there. So, before we get into it, please introduce yourselves, and we can start.
Yeah, so my name is Emma McGrattan, and I'm Senior Vice President for Engineering and Product at a company called Actian. We're all about making data easy. So it's connecting to, analyzing, and managing data in a way that anybody can do it.
Cool.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chris Royles. I'm CTO for EMEA at Cloudera. We make data accessible to everybody.
Cool. Data is good for everybody.
Yeah.
And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Sunderland. I'm a data practitioner from Initio, and we make data available for everybody.
I like that.
Awesome.
Common ground.
Like ice cream.
Yeah, well, we're a data ecosystem platform doing lots of good stuff, and I think there's a strong overlap in all of what we do, so
all right.
Good frenemies, I would suggest.
Advanced analytics is something that I consider like a hygiene factor nowadays. If you're not able to do it, you're behind your competition, because there are tools such as Cloudera and others that make it so accessible compared to how it was in 2016, 2019. You had to be a bit more of an expert. Nowadays, so accessible that if you're not doing it, you're not only not doing your due diligence, you're quite likely behind in many respects. Is that sentiment correct, or am I off? What is your sense of it?
Absolutely. So what we're doing in Actian, as I said, making data easy is making advanced analytics easy. We want to be able to have conversations with the data. I think we see an explosive growth in data and an explosive growth in information that's provided to you. So if I get information, I want to know, so what? What am I going to do with it, right? So make it actionable and make it easy for me to do something meaningful with the data that I get. But yeah, advanced analytics needs to be simplified. Natural language interfaces to the platform is something that we're working on at the moment.
Let's make sure we're using the same words for stuff here. Like, what is advanced analytics? Everybody's like, oh, AI's been around since the 80s, but it's not the same AI, right? We're not talking about the same thing. Right. So when we're talking about advanced analytics today, what is advanced analytics to you today?
So if I think in terms of the organizations we're working with, a lot of that is simulation. Okay, they want to digitally simulate something, or they want to solve really hard problems using analytics and put that into operation. It's about business value at the end of the day. They want to solve hard problems, and data and analytics is one way to do that. If I go back a decade, it was all about embedding dashboards and views into applications, so it was in situ of the task you were carrying out in HR or in sales or something of that nature. Hard analytics back then was, how do I forecast across a very wide business team my financial outcome for the end of the quarter? That would be seen as hard analytics, and doing that at scale was hard a decade ago. Where we've got to now is hard analytics and solving hard problems around data and analytics. It's about scale and the rate at which things are changing, I would argue. People are trying to get answers to a lot of questions, and they're trying to do it at a pace we've never seen before. Just placing it into context of an application is no longer enough. It has to be the application. And like the application or the workflow becomes second to the actual advanced analytics you're trying to undertake.
Yeah. Do you think that the advanced analytics is the same advanced analytics today as it was,
Yeah, I think
back when the term was popularized?
Well, there's always something more advanced than where you are now, right? The notion of big data is data beyond your ability to cope with it. So, maybe advanced analytics is more advanced in your own capability, and so therefore it's a relative thing. I think, I work for Ab Initio. Ab Initio is Latin, it means from first principles. And so I always try and approach things from first principles. It's our strategy as well as our company name. So for me, analytics from first principles is about finding context. Why did something happen? And you don't really know why, or else you wouldn't ask the question. And so context is it temporal context? What were the events that led up to a person doing things? What were the geospatial context? What were the socioeconomic context? And once you've got that context, you've got a hypothesis that you need to test. And so the transition from that exploratory nature to deployment is really the hard thing. And maybe advanced analytics isn't about the algorithms, the technology, it's about the cultural change in the organization to accept that you need to experiment.
Yeah.
And you need to make mistakes. And you need to adapt from that. And actually the problem isn't, can I get a model into production quickly? It's, when I know that it isn't right, can I get it out?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And when you're dealing with organizations that might take months or even a year to deploy a model into production, it doesn't matter whether they've got the latest algorithm, they've still got a problem once that model goes live, right? So for me, advanced analytics is really about managing the ecosystem as a whole and that continual cycle, because if I deploy a model and it's effective, it's going to change the agent's behavior, it's going to change my customer's behavior. And that means the data that I use to train my model is going to change, and that means my model is going to change, and so it decays.
Yeah.
So that cycle goes on forever, and your ability to iterate faster than your competitor is what gives you the advantage to be advanced.
I think the last time advanced analytics had a big sort of mind share push was when big data was a thing. And so, you know, you would have these data sets that were maybe pushing a terabyte, if we're not talking about like telco or oil and some other places where, even there I would argue that the data sizes shouldn't necessarily have to be so big. The point is, my sense of like the value that Cloudera brings is often underappreciated because people focus on using it like a database where you can do big joins. But the data hasn't been growing as fast as we thought. There's a lot of it and a lot of variety in it, but I can crunch more on my A6000 GPU than anybody has the patience to wait for using Snowflake. You know, so it's not the big data that's the value anymore. But I would never tell them to write, you know, their whole enterprise platform in CUDA. I would tell them use Snowflake because it's got lots of other good stuff. So my sense of it is that advanced analytics now is not about big data crunching anymore. It's about all the other stuff around it. And Cloudera is not Spark. Cloudera is not just Impala. It's a bunch of stuff. It's a whole platform. Is that the sense of it also? Like, is the computation, I mean, maybe I'm pushing back here because you said it's about simulating stuff. How much is it about simulating versus encouraging best practices, let's say?
There was a lot of questions and a lot of statements in your commentary there. So stepping back, I think there's aspects to data. It's not just its volume, it's how proprietary is it to your organization? Is it unique to your customer touch points? At the end of the day, data is generated at points of contact. And so those points of contact, whether it be a machine learning model generating its telemetry so you can monitor its drift, or some other analytics, one thing that I would always step back on and focus on is where is the biggest value to that organization going to be returned? And if I think about organizations, say in financial services industries, fraud and error is a very big problem. You're talking hundreds of millions of dollars at risk if that's not done well. And advanced analytics helps automate those processes, and it comes at great value to those organizations. Then you've got to think in terms of how those organizations store and manage data, and they do have vast amounts of data. At Cloudera, we're proud, on behalf of our customers, working with them, to have 25 exabytes of data under management. That is a significant amount of information. Some would argue more than ever written and spoken in human history as data. So, okay, why is so much data being collected, and what is it being used for? And I suppose the comment's been made, there's a seasonality to data. You don't necessarily want to store all of your information. Yep. It's using the right data in the right way to generate the right outcome. And so what we're really focused on is making sure we can optimize the data that's most relevant to the problem, but also present it through many different scenarios or access points to drive multi-analytics against data. We want to reduce complexity, reduce data copy, but enable that data to be used in many different ways. And you can start making choices about the data. Is it the right data to use in that way? Has it got the right quality attached to it? Is it of the right type? So it's those types of things that we're really focused on, making sure the data is of the right type, being presented to the right use case to drive the highest value to the customer.
I think you've given many examples of sort of good working principles. And I tend to like tools that encourage you to use best practice and to adopt principles that we know work well. do you think that that's sort of the direction that, this is a leading question, but you know, following up on what I mentioned earlier about advanced analytics being more about best practice that we've learned from the past decade, do you still think it's a matter of processing power and data volume, or have we moved on to sort of encouraging maturity in some way when it comes to advanced analytics? What is the spirit of advanced analytics these days?
Yeah, so for us, definitely reaching a point of maturity when it comes to advanced analytics, but one of the things that we're seeing is that whereas in the past we would bring all of the data into a data platform so that we can analyze it, right? Our customers now want to have that distributed data, leave the data where it belongs inside the systems. We don't need to replicate all of our Salesforce data in the platform, right? Ask the question of the data in Salesforce, bring it into the platform for answering a specific question.
Yeah.
But let's not have multiple copies of the data all over the place, because from a governance perspective, that's just a nightmare, right? So when we're thinking about the challenge of data analytics, we're definitely thinking lineage, governance, like bringing all of those aspects together in our platform from Actian.
The only reason I mentioned telco before is, you know, if you need a couple of samples to be able to determine what the behavior of a handset is, it's enough with 100,000 examples. And just because you have 1 billion examples doesn't mean you need all of them. So I think a lot of companies have been collecting data for very many years without knowing exactly what they're going to do with it, what it's good for, or having, and then conversely, not collecting data that they should be collecting. So they're like, we have lots of data, we should be able to do cool stuff. And it's like, yeah, but do you have the data you actually need?
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. So my experience working at, on the record, I worked at Sony PlayStation analysing gameplay data. And so one of the things we started out was handling digital exhaust, right? Data that was a byproduct of some other activity, you know, something that a developer or an engineer had left on as a log trace, which you then capture, because you're after any kind of data to help you understand. And then once you can tease out some valuable insights, you're able to persuade people that up front you need to design for the capture, design for the intent. So you've actually got the right data in the right format, right? And you know, one of the challenges then is actually that transition about how you sell the value of the data and the decision on the promise of the outcome it's going to give, right? And so again, come back to that, the skills aren't necessarily the ability to process data and have a good algorithm, or to be able to access petabytes, exabytes, zettabytes of data, whatever. It's about your ability to discern a valuable income and persuade people to do something different, right? And I think that ultimately comes down to trust. Do you trust the data to make a decision, and are you trusted as an individual to deliver value with it? And the more layers of obfuscation, the barriers, the harder it is to achieve that transparency. You know, one of the key things then is about lineage, right? And understand, where does this data come from and what has happened to it?
Right.
Data is used for a purpose it was never intended, and now it has a new purpose, and that means that quality is subjective for that new purpose, right? And so you need to be able to assert new governance rules around that. You need to have people responsible for a data product that might serve multiple different purposes. That, for example, I build a data product that might support some ad hoc analysis to get some insight, but if I build a predictive model on that, now I've got to have that data available as part of my real-time scoring engine. How do I, is that person actually aware that's what's going to happen? And so the fear of, can we delete this data, and why you hold on to it, and why you end up with more data than you can cope with, is because you don't know what you're dealing with. So an idea that I think about is active pruning, right? How could you prune data? And you can only do that once you've got total lineage, right? And so that's a goal on there. So for me, advanced analytics is about attaining and achieving total and complete lineage. And only then you can articulate the back propagation of value to know what you don't need.
Okay, this is very...
And I've covered lots of things in that.
No, that's good. This is very, I would say it's data-centric in a sense. But like, I want to hear your thoughts on how much of a data platform needs to exist in order for it to be valuable. So, I could start with using something like just pure Spark if all I want to do is distribute something and do some kind of streaming computation. But, you have the data catalog, you have different types of data formats that you would want to store on disk and maybe manage in some neat way. You want access control, you want data lineage, you want all this stuff. I just wonder if people get stuck in advanced analytics platform projects more often than actual projects. And so what is the MVP and what components are necessary for an MVP that is compliant, but doesn't necessarily have to have every single advanced analytics capability in place in order to start deriving value, so that you don't have this ERP project that's 10 years long, where the original person that started it doesn't even work at the company anymore because it took so long to implement it. Like, is it possible to make those MVP projects? And what does the smallest possible footprint look like? What do you think?
Smallest possible for me would be a set of connectors and some intelligence around it, right? So the ability to connect to the various data sources that you're using to answer a question, and then the ability to actually perform the analysis on that in a distributed fashion, right?
Okay,
So
and do you
want to
need
get to a minimal footprint? That to me would be the minimal footprint.
Is there a sense in standardizing on the processing approach? You know, saying we're always going to use this Python thing, or this computation engine, or this database, or something. Do you think that's part of an advanced analytics strategy?
No, I don't. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think the language that's used for processing will change all the time, and more we're moving towards natural language processing, right? So we want to engage with the data in spoken language, right? So I think
I mean like for the actual computation, not necessarily how the users sending stuff
sorry, the
in.
actual computation.
You know, like, are you going to run it on
We use,
Spark?
like, a ton of
Are you going to
Spark.
run it like
absolutely.
a Python stuff run? Like,
Right.
Is there a sense in having a central engine?
Got it.
You know, and maybe Microsoft wants SQL Server to be that kind of engine. Maybe you guys have some kind of thing like that in your...
So what the approach we're taking at Cloudera is it's around where innovation really happens. And if I take large language models as an example, the open source community is innovating very rapidly in that space. And so when you take it to like computational engines, what we are seeing is trends in various directions. And what's interesting, actually, when you get into data engineering and data science kind of workloads, we're seeing more adoption of Python and frameworks like Ray, and less over Spark on Scala, much more Python, PySpark. And so we are seeing some trending in that domain at the moment. And our task, of course, is data scientists and data engineers could be very technically opinionated about the tools they use, provide them flexibility. To your particular question about minimum footprint, I refer to it in the opposite way. I say, what's the table stakes? As in, what should everybody be able to do that would kind of set the baseline? And how do we delete things and make things simpler from the bottom up? So the first thing is you might consider a lakehouse. It helps converge a whole pile of different technologies and simplify and standardize how your data and tables are represented within storage. You might also think in terms of lineage, security, and governance being absolutely fundamental. And if you follow a modern architecture like a data fabric or a data mesh approach, at the end of the day, that should be federated. And the way I refer to it is everybody should be playing by the same rules. An enterprise, a true enterprise, doesn't matter how decentralized they are, has a set of rules that they need to apply at the enterprise level. But then you want everybody within each area of that business to play in their own world and have their own flexibility, because we all know that practitioners close to the problem, close to the use case, close to the customer, are great at solving problems in their space.
Well, let me ask you to clarify then. So let's say you have a minimum set of services that you want to be able to offer everybody. Do you imagine, or do you see among the more successful customers that they deploy that in parallel and let old stuff rot? Or do you see them do it as like a big project where they have to migrate into a lake house or whatever the case may be? What is the right way?
It can be a combination of all of those, as in you can overlay your lake house on an existing store if you like, so take your data lake, could be cloud storage, and put your lake house on top. And when I say lake house, I mean you're now storing data in a way that can be presented to many different compute engines, including Spark as one, but also your governance and security is in place.
Right.
What that means, coming back to my original, we make data analytics accessible to all, greater security and governance means I can open the data up to more people. I can have more confidence in doing so, and I've got the safety net in place so that if Chris does something silly with data or blows some confidential information, it's already redacted automatically by the platform. So one thing we're focused on when we talk about advanced analytics, you mentioned it earlier, data's getting so big, it might be too big for humans to now manage at scale. We're focused on how we automate that, how we make that easy, so you don't need to worry about it anymore.
What do you say about technical debt, which is what all the sad IT people that just get one more thing on their plate yell immediately. And I'm like, do it. But is it a real thing? Is it...
I think that the whatever industry, whatever your practice, you like to invent words that make you feel happy about what you do, right?
Or less depressed in the case of IT admins.
Maybe, but I think that the reality is that what you're dealing with is burden. If you want to be agile, you want to be, you take off your rucksack, you take off your heavy boots, you put on running shoes, you put on running kit. If you want to make a Formula One car, it's light. So what you're dealing with is technology burden, because you've gone with all the hype. You've added all these things in, and you've got a complete disparity of how people use and operate and code. And you've got different coding practices, different development methodologies, different styles, different standards. So you've got this burden that's stopping you from iterating and being agile. But it's not just technology. You've got a semantic burden. Semantic burden because you don't understand your process and your data and the meaning. So you have two challenges that if you want to be faster, if you want to be better with data, be more advanced in doing your analytics, is you've got to have capacity to do that. And most organizations strip capacity because it gives them a short-term cost reduction. So how do you create capacity through reducing that semantic burden and the technology burden, right? And you do that by using metadata. You use that by using active metadata to automate your processes so that your standardized way of working is just straightforward. So to your point about, I want to be able to access the data wherever it is, so there isn't a burden on the organization. So, Emma wants to access a data set. Well, the traditional way is someone have to get the requirements, understand who Emma is and what our role is and what she's trying to access and what policies are at play in that, and they have to write a specification, and then someone's got to code that and they've got to test it. Well, actually, it's outsourced to this other team. They go and do that work, and then someone tests it, and they deploy it, and they miss something in the test, and then it fails, and you've got a security alert, and now you've got a risk register, and you go back and do that. And so you're doing all these processes. Well, what if actually your access to data was automatic, and that the data was masked regardless of wherever it is, automatically, immediately? And you can immediately look and go, you know what? I don't actually need that data because it doesn't add any incremental value to the analytics I'm doing because it provides no context. Remember, context is king when it comes to analytics. Right. So you want to, it's not how quickly can you get access to data and use it, it's how quickly you determine that you don't need it.
Right.
And so how can you do that if you're swamped, if you're overburdened with technology and semantic
But I have to say, that really extends to the whole stack.
Of course it does.
Being able to determine, when a service is not needed and everything, there has to be sort of a life cycle management and a balance sheet approach. The reason I don't believe in tech debt is because debt has a function in economic systems. You just need to manage your debt.
Well, it implies that you've taken out some kind of loan against the future. And like, at what point is it paid off?
So at some point in the future, somebody's going to have to fix the tech problem that you've created. But if you're making a ton of money or creating a ton of value during that time, it's paid itself off over that time. The problem is when you have old services that are 5 years old that nobody remembers why they were started, and somebody's still paying for them.
5 years old, right?
Yeah.
I've got customers using stuff that I wrote 20 years ago, and it still works fine. Still adapts.
Yeah, but right? If it's creating value, you're all good to go.
Yeah,
but the point is, there's stuff
that's only legacy. It's only legacy if it's not adding value and it's actually hitting you, right?
Yes.
If it's still adaptive, it still supports your business needs, then it's not legacy.
Somebody needs to be paying for that and getting in trouble if you're not making money on it internally. And that balance sheet exercise is seldom done.
But your challenge then is how do you back propagate value? How do you know? And part of that's why total lineage is important, because cost propagates forward, value propagates backwards.
Sure.
And the challenge is that if you're a middle tier manager in an IT department, there is no way for you to increase sales. The only way you can increase value to the organization is by reducing cost. And if you have no hardware on your budget and you have no software on your budget, and you've only got people, there's only one way that you can add value, and that's by reducing your people cost. And in doing that, you challenge the IP of the organization, and you challenge the knowledge capital and the social capital that is existing in your team.
There's a pretty hard cap on the amount of value you can produce by reducing operational costs. You can fire everyone, and that's the cap. But there's not necessarily any cap on the amount of value you can create by creating a compelling product that customers or somebody else is willing to pay more for. And so I wonder, sort of in your experience, when it comes to advanced analytics, I feel like a lot of time the low-hanging fruit are these internal cost reductions and efficiency ones. Do you think that's a good place to start? Or do you think people should be focusing on, I don't want to say bluebird stuff, because I don't think that stuff that's customer-facing is necessarily exotic. But in your experience, sort of what works, what should the ratio be, and how should people approach advanced analytics in terms of how much of their effort to spend on those kinds of use cases?
So when it comes to our customer base, what we hear from them is that the customer-facing stuff is where their priorities are, right? And that's where they're spending their time and their money. And the internal stuff, less important, and they're accumulating debt there, right? And they're okay putting people on those problems instead of investing to build out solutions for it. So that's definitely been a challenge for our customers.
Well, I know in logistics, for example, a lot of companies would like to offer services like same-day delivery. And you can either hire some cheap labor to do that, or you can develop an advanced algorithm. But the advanced algorithm is going to be weird. People are going to have to agree on stuff. You're maybe going to have to reshuffle your depot where the packages are. Nobody likes doing that kind of stuff. Let's just hire some cheap people instead.
Right.
But so, do you still think that it is a good approach to go for those? I just see a lot of companies focusing on customer support chatbots. I just think that's the most fantasy-deprived idea you can come up with. There's so many more cool things you can do.
Right.
But maybe it's too tall of an ask.
What I enjoyed earlier was your concrete example. So I think we can provide a concrete example. We're very fortunate to be working with OCBC Bank out of Singapore. And what they recognized very quickly is if they augmented their development team by bringing in models that could help them write code better, aligned with their bank's standards and practices, building in the right security, auditability, traceability, as you mentioned, governance and lineage, into the code as it's built and designed, and make that scalable. So they're not a team of 200 developers, they're a team of 300 developers augmented. Yeah? And then they let them loose. They let them go build modern AI into the bank's operational applications. And they focused across the bank. They went into the back office, complex documents. Let's do topic extraction. Let's do summarization. Let's do redlining. Let's write a series of applications to support that team. Drove greater performance in that team, more efficiency in that team. They went to the front office, the customer-facing interface. They didn't go build chatbots. What they did was build consultants, augmented by their enterprise data to give great advice on which products are right for you, which cards are right for you, which, and this is going to sound like, okay, this is interesting, which investments are right for you. But that was all backed off on enterprise data, on market risk data that bank had access to that could augment that dialogue with.
Yeah.
The large language model is just being used to generate the content. The content is still the enterprise data informing that conversation.
Yeah.
And they've built that. They've put it into production. They're seeing real-world returns. 150 models in production. 4 million decisions made a day. This is real. They're there already. They're not just thinking about it. And I like the sequencing in which they executed. Help the builders first, build better, and then go and find opportunities to drive greater efficiency in the back office and greater experience in the customer front office.
There is an interesting observation here where I do think that the replacing or increasing efficiency, right, of expensive resources gives a big bang for the buck. If a developer becomes twice as efficient and is an expensive resource, that is a huge gain compared to replacing somebody that's maybe not as expensive a resource. I want to change topic just a little bit, but it's sort of related, which is that for a while, everybody was like, we're all cloud. It has to be all in the cloud. You guys have cloud in your name.
Yeah.
It's managed platforms, walled gardens. We don't want to care about it. I am sort of biased. I have some workstations that I work with that are just so convenient compared to working in the cloud. And I'm not saying that the cloud doesn't have its particular use case, but for me and the specific way I work, I've found that having a combination of tools makes me a little bit better. So some workstations, some local resources, some cloud resources, and there's a really nice workflow in between everything. Are you guys seeing that hybrid setups are coming back in vogue?
Yeah.
What do you say?
We've seen a ton of repatriation of workloads that just...
That's a great word, repatriation.
I love that, yeah.
Yeah.
And for what reasons?
Right, cost containment. Right, primarily it's
mainly cost-driven?
Yeah, they for repatriated workloads, there's certain workloads that are never going to cloud, right? So we have, one of our customers is the Irish Revenue Commissioners, right, which is taxation for the country of Ireland, and they're saying that data is so sensitive, it's never going to cloud. It's going to sit in their data center forever, right? But there are other projects that and workloads that do go to cloud that, if it's not a peaky workload, right, cloud may not make sense, right? If you've got a very consistent workload, the economics of cloud may not make sense, right? So what we're seeing is that desire to move those workloads back on premises. And we've built out our platform with a separated data plane and control plane. So you've got a single control plane that can manage the data assets on premises or cloud. So it doesn't matter where the workload is being deployed. You've got that same interface, same set of skills, same apps built against it.
It's interesting what you bring up here, because you do require a couple of capabilities in order to be multi-cloud, hybrid, and so on. Because, for instance, let's say you go with AKS for Kubernetes type stuff. You can do hybrid stuff with AKS, but the more deep you go into one vendor's ecosystem, the more difficult it is to
get out of it.
Do hybrid and that other kind of stuff.
Right.
And so you do need to plan a little bit for it. Are you
So I think part of the challenge, we're all doing similar things here, right? So I think part of the challenge is, I don't think you can go half in, right? If you go half in all these different technologies, that's when you have a problem, that you're creating that burden. You have to commit to something to make it work. And when you do, you can then optimize over that. And to your point, if you know your business, if you know the behavior of your customers, their interactions with your products and services, and you can predict what they're going to do, then you can optimize over that. The challenge is when you've got a volatile marketplace, when you've got volatile customers, you do a mergers and acquisition, and suddenly you bring on a diverse set of customers that behave in a different way, and that gives you a challenge in lots of different areas.
What do you mean by going in halfway? Like, what are you thinking of?
Well, I've seen situations where people say, well, we're going to have a loosely coupled microservices architecture, right? And so you end up with all these different technologies deployed with different standards because it's all microservices. And then what happens is key people leave, and then this microservice becomes a key critical infrastructure element that you can't maintain anymore, right, in how that all fits together. So having the ability, a single language for data across your organization is a really important thing. Whether it's Ab Initio, Cloudera, Actian, or whatever, it's really important that you consider the systemic optimization rather than the individual needs of someone saying, oh, I want to play with this new thing, because as a technologist, particularly if you're not actually doing analytics that says, right, well, I increased customer yield by 20%, the only way that you perceive you're going to be valuable is by being current, right, and hopping on the latest technology, right? Yet, actually, organizations want boring technology. They want it to just work and be predictable and just be okay, right? So the interesting thing about the cloud and the repatriation is about the hidden thing in there is that organizations were changing their financial model. They were going from a CapEx model to an OpEx one, and they didn't realize that with OpEx, you need really tight feedback loops. And if you don't have that feedback loop, somebody else is going to get inside your decision cycle and take advantage of you, right? And that's why you get escalating costs, because you've got runaway feedback. Right. As soon as you bring that control in, it allows you to work better. From an Ab Initio perspective, we existed before the cloud, right? But our architecture was designed to be a software supercomputer that would have no limits and be unbounded by hardware. And that means we were cloud ready before the cloud. It means that when it came to processing, when you've only got one bit of tin, right, that sat on your desk, you want to maximize the performance of that, squeeze every ounce of CPU and be CPU bound out of that. Right. And that means that same benefit means, well, you can be efficient on-prem and efficient in the cloud. Right, so we've got a customer that grew their data volume by 700% in the cloud, but only had a 15% increase in costs. right? You know, those are really, but you've got to get it right, and you've got to have the right people, and those people have to have the capacity to deal with that. And as soon as you're reacting to your customers doing something different, that's when you lose control, and that's when your repatriation costs start to become an interesting thing. But if you're spending your time just moving between technologies, you're not delivering incremental value for the business.
Okay, so is that sentiment echoed by? Do you see people pulling resources back, or is this just a temporary thing, or where is it going to sort of even out?
So customers are either in cloud. So we've got some customers we've helped move to cloud and accelerated them on that journey. What I mean is we've taken their existing estate, if you like, and moved it to a modernized way of working on cloud. And what's most important when you move those workloads is be data-driven in the process. So the first thing we put in place is observability. How is your workload running? Is it running as efficiently as possible? Let's optimize it. Do you still want more benefit from that? Let's move it to cloud. Does it work more optimally in cloud? To your point, is it the right type of workload for cloud? Some organizations using data and being data-driven have realized that the cost of doing that for some workloads is not what they anticipated and have repatriated to on-premise. And we're fortunate in that we build a hybrid platform. So it works well in all form factors, and actually it brings a benefit. We bring those cloud qualities into the data center: elasticity, workload isolation, observability. All of that becomes a single view, like you say, a control plane. So you can make really good data and analytics-based decisions, data-driven, about where to run the workload for best effect, and if it's better to run it in the cloud, run it in the cloud if it's more cost-effective.
Right.
And we would encourage that.
And of course you have to deal with, it's not just your needs as an IT department, there's also compliance reasons. This data can't move from this region. This data's sensitive and therefore can't go in there. And so context in any analytics is king, right? And if you lose context, then you're out of control.
I have to say I've done some pretty good deals this year solely on the ability to run things on-premise with large language models, where we have some competitors that have some pretty mature products, but they're completely cloud-only. And then not only are they cloud-only, but they're using software as a service services that they're completely dependent on, that if they were hypothetically to be cut off from, would just disappear entirely. But we only have a few minutes, and so what I want from you guys is a blurb on what is the frontier of advanced analytics. Where are we headed?
So for me, it's simplicity. It's the democratization of analytics and making advanced analytics available to everybody. It's that co-pilot-like experience where you get somebody that probably not the smartest person in the organization, but made a lot smarter through the use of Gen AI.
Okay.
But yeah, simplification is what it's about for us when it comes to
co-pilot. I like that word. Cool.
Yeah, I suppose at Cloudera we're focused on three things: helping organizations modernize their data architecture. There's various options in that. Making sure you can do true hybrid, but make it easy. Not it's a one-way gate to cloud. We give you choice and flexibility. And the third is accelerating AI, and we do that in two ways. One, build AI with Cloudera, and we're really focused on making that a really good experience. Or two, embed AI into Cloudera. And as I mentioned, data volumes are so big now, you've got no choice but to automate.
Right. What do you say?
And I think from Initio's point of view, it's about creating a new type of asset, and that asset is active metadata. The ability to not just passively collect data quality or lineage or ontologies, but to be able to bring that all together and to activate it in the right way to automate those processes we already described. So I think the interesting thing now is that if you invest in metadata as an asset, it allows you to do that heterogeneous execution, to give you the choice of where you want to do things, instead of having these islands of automation. You know, there's a phrase that we had from the 80s that we're coming back around again, right? So for me, metadata, active metadata as an asset, is a way to actually really drive automation, is a really profound thing. And that automation covers all aspects of governance, control, management, self-service, and of course data processing.
Metadata driving automation, co-pilot, hybrid, and flexibility. Cool. Thanks for this panel. I hope you learned a lot. Our panelists here are here at Data Innovation Summit. Be here or be square. But I'm sure there's good ways to contact you all if you're interested in adopting advanced analytics in your organization. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back shortly.